After considerable discussion in regard to the need of a new place of worship and also a rabbi, it was moved by M. Katz, seconded by S.D. Samolowitz, that a committee of 3 be appointed to solicit subscriptions for a rabbi.
I was born in 22, and the congregation at that time had a fairly new synagogue in 1924 in Coatesville. And from the time I was a kid until I was out of high school, I was in the building 7 days a week. We used to have Cheder, Hebrew school, every day after public school. And on Saturday, I used to go to shul, go to synagogue with my father. And on Sunday, we had Sunday school. So 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year, we were in the building. And then they had a synagogue at 4th Avenue and Chestnut Street, a house that they bought and fixed up. Incidentally, the synagogue at 4th Avenue had a balcony for the women. And when they built the synagogue on 5th and Harmony in 1924, they changed the policy, and the men and women sat together. Everybody was closely connected. There were a lot of intermarriages in the families, and there were a lot of relatives, and that's how the congregation grew. Outside of the 5 and 10 and the Sears and Pennies, almost all the stores were Jewish owned.
Downtown Coatesville was very active. Many Jewish merchants.
There were haberdashers, there were milliners, there were ladies' garment shops, men's shops, and a large preponderance of these businesses had Jewish owners.
A lot of the members of the congregation were merchants, because what drew a lot of members, a lot of people to Coatesville originally was the fact that the steel workers in the Lukin Steel Company were Polish and Russian and Hungarian and Middle Eastern Europe. And a lot of our people who could speak that language, the customers were comfortable. But I can remember for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we used to put, all the merchants used to get together and put an ad in the newspaper. The following stores will be closed on such and such a day. And there would be a list, and it was almost 70% of the town would be closed down on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur.
You can hear the stories of when the circus came through town and how the stores were open all the time. And Jenny Bear used to live right down from the synagogue, and what a fantastic impetus they were to the community itself. Jewish men who were destitute, who would come for a handout and for someplace to stay overnight. And there was a whole group there. You don't see it now, but they used to have a group of men who would donate money, and they would form a little conglomerate. And if anybody in town needed money as a loan, they could get the loan from this group who had laid out the money, and then they would repay it.
Most of these people were quite successful as far as business was concerned. I'm sure there were others that I'm just not fully aware of. But they were all contributors to the synagogue, basically. The major thing that happened in Coatesville was that Lukin Steel started to lay off people. And they went from an employment of about 8,000 people to several thousand. And I think that had a severe effect on the economy of Coatesville and the surrounding area.
Those steel mills had a hard time, and the community itself became deteriorated, and the neighborhood got to be not so nice, and the women didn't want to come in the evening to meetings, and they didn't want to send the kids there. And it was, we found a very unpleasant situation. Plus, of course, the fact that the congregation was getting smaller because people didn't want to come to Coatesville generally.
It was early on enlisted by Bill Shartok to become an officer of the congregation and eventually become the president of the congregation. The biggest difficulties in those days were the conflicts between the rabbi and Kurt Strauss. At one point in time, I sat with the rabbi with a corned beef sandwich and tried to give him half of it because he was so distraught over some small item between he and Kurt that he wanted to leave and resign. But eventually we talked him out of that.
I think a couple of years ago I figured out that over 50% of our people have never seen the building in Coatesville, let alone have any attachment to it. They're all newer.
I am the third generation, and my children are the fourth generation to be part of the congregation. So I remember very well sitting with my Zayden, my Bubba, and my uncle, and my father, and my mother in the old synagogue.
The congregation was a very tightly knit one. And virtually everybody, I would say maybe 60–70% of the congregation came to services Friday night, for instance.
All right, this is a picture from my bar mitzvah. They had just redid the social hall in this synagogue, and they had built a stage, and we had a band, and this is the band leader, and these are my grandparents, who had been here since approximately 1915. This is my father, who was born here in 1918. And this was in the basement of the synagogue, March of '61. And we had about close to 200 people there in the basement.
They were great steps, and it made for I would say, a little bit more of a communal feeling when you certainly left synagogue, because the steps were very, very broad, and 10, 15, 20 people at a time could actually go down these steps. So it prompted a lot of talking and socializing on these steps and right outside of when you got on the sidewalk.
At one time, Beth Israel owned the two houses next door to the synagogue in Coatesville. One house, as it was explained to me, was used for the Hebrew school and the Sunday school classes, and the other house was the parsonage for the rabbi to live in. After they built the addition to the building in the late 50s, they didn't need the houses anymore because they had religious school classrooms as part of the addition.
There was a card club that they called the Nine at Niners, and this Nine at Niner group met, there were 9 of them, they met at 9 o'clock on a Monday night, play cards. Among the folks, and I can probably name them all, there was Clara Chertok, who is Bill Chertok's mom, Clara Israelson, Clara Schwartz, a woman by the name of Vera Mandel, Bess Weiss, Florence Baer. I believe Florence Baer was Alex Endy's sister. I hope I'm right about that. Toby Rothberg. There were 9 of them, and I can remember as a kid every 9th Monday night having a very difficult time sleeping because the Nine at Niners did more than play cards. They told jokes, and it got kind of raucous.
The group formed together in August of 1904 to form a Jewish community, and the first thing they did was buy a cemetery, which they opened in 1906. And then in 1907, they started a YMHA, a Young Men's Hebrew Association, which formed together to have a religious school and become the congregation which Beth Israel grew into.
My dad was watched for, I guess, 24 hours until he was buried by a group of, I believe, 3 men that took turns over the, over the evening, over the night.
This is the Synagogue Geniza, established in 1967, where we bury prayer books and prayer shawls, talesim, and other religious objects. This is a special Holocaust memorial erected by the B'nai B'rith. And each year we have a Kever Avot service before Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, before the high holidays, when families can come out and visit the graves of their relatives. We hold a service up here by the Holocaust Memorial and then go to the individual graves to say the memorial prayers in memory of their family members. It gives the Hebrew name. This is telling when she was born and when she died, the year, the Hebrew year. And then this is an abbreviation to Hey Neshama Tzrura B'Torah Chayim. May her soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life.
I remember Maury Kaufman got up and he said, we can't afford not to do it. We need to take a leap of faith, which is what I wanted somebody to say.
Kurt Strauss was a very strong supporter of the idea, and he contributed very heavily to the seed money. It was Kurt Strauss and Mo Margolis and Bill Halpern and me and some others. Gary Levin was in on it. And we finally found this area up here. We decided it would be non-competing with the other existing congregations in the county.
I know my cousin Mo, Alex Endy, Bill Halpern, from what I can recall, were probably the three prime movers in finding the ground.
When we picked this spot, it was surrounded by farmland. And everybody, as I said, thought it was very, very remote. Now when you look around, there are literally hundreds and hundreds of homes that have been built within a stone's throw of this building. The Catholic Church is being built as we speak across the street. I think that they picked the spot partially because we had laid the groundwork for it. The township has welcomed us with open arms. They see us as a positive influence on the community. So in innumerable ways, I think that we have been an active and positive influence on this community.
When we moved the ark that's now in our chapel library, Beis Medrash, that ark was the original ark from 1924 that they built when they first built the building in Coatesville. And we moved that ark. The top piece of it comes off. It's a big, heavy piece, and they had to take the top piece of it off to move it. And underneath we found the artist's signature. He signed it and dated it, and that was most interesting. The ark behind me, when the artist planned for this space and for the new ark in our sanctuary here, one of the things that she did is, as she planned the whole space, the stained glass window surrounding the ark is supposed to be a depiction of Solomon's knot. And Solomon's knot is supposed to be the source of all wisdom, Solomon being the wisest king, and this was her interpretation of it. Well, quite by happenstance, and looking at the old ark after we moved into this building, Solomon's knot is also part of the old ark. And just the two artists came up with the same concept to use for the ark and for the space on the bima, and that was quite interesting. So he said, when you are in prayer, Dalef ne miata omed, know before whom you stand. And I found the origin of it, and I told Alex, yes, we can put it up because I can now cite the source and tell people where it's from. And still, I talked to rabbis who have it in their synagogues. I said, do you know where that's from? And nobody knows. But I have the original source, so I'm very, very proud of that.
And in order for them to raise money for the shul, they used to knit and make things and cook things.
The women did all the food preparation for every event that we had. They were the kitchen committee, and we had a very active sisterhood.
Initially, the kitchen and cooking was a big part of sisterhood. It became much less so in recent years, but I believe I see it coming back. We just had a sisterhood self-cooked Shabbat dinner. That was the first one we've had in a number of years.
I think the synagogue is beautiful. You know, I worked on the committee for the kitchen, and we went around looking at all kinds of synagogues before we decided on the plans. Let me tell you, the men put the kitchen together in Coatesville, and everything was too high to reach. and everything was locked up, and the sinks were too deep. But it was just interesting. But you know, they put a kitchen together the way a man sees a kitchen, not the way the women have to work in the kitchen.
Sisterhood pledged to pay for the kitchen, and I think if I'm saying it right, I think within 5 years we paid off the kitchen, and I think that was a great project, and we're